So to please his dad, a freshman went out for track. He had no athletic ability, but his father had been a good runner back in his day. And his first race was a one-on-one mile race in which he ran against a seasoned miler. He was badly beaten. Not wanting to disappoint his father, however, he sent him a text saying this: "You will be happy to know that I ran against Bill Williams, the best miler in school. He came in next to last, while I came in second." Now, would you say that that was deceitfully dirty or skillfully selective of the truth? Well, welcome everybody. You will notice that I am not Chad. He and his lovely wife went over to see something about a groundhog, I think. And so they're enjoying over there, and we hope and pray that they have a great time and come back here safely next week to join us back here. But we have been working our way through the book of Titus for the past couple weeks here. And so this will be our third week working through the text. And in the first week, we learned from Chad that unshakable faith is rooted in God's truth. And then last week, we learned that unshakable faith is lived with integrity through the life of the church leadership. And so this week, Paul turns his focus to the membership of the church to give them some practical advice on living out faith in our daily lives where truth is sometimes hard to come by. True? You know, we may tend to think that the attack on truth is more of a recent thing, but even back 35 years ago, a millennium ago, Barna Research released these strange stats. They found that while an estimated 74% of Americans strongly agree that there is only one true God who is holy and perfect and who created the world and rules it today, so 74% agreed with that, an estimated 65% either strongly agreed or somewhat agree with the assertion that there is no such thing as absolute truth. Figure that out, right? You can't have it both ways. And so that is why we need a faith that is consistent and sound, uninfluenced by culture, not just a Sunday morning at 10 a.m. faith, but throughout the week as well. A faith that matters when we're in the midst of difficult things. And we all go through difficult things in this life, don't we? A faith that holds true in every place and in every situation that we find ourselves in. And as we look into the first 10 verses of chapter 2 that Ramiro read for us, we find, I think, some tools that can help us along the way. And the first of those, and this will be number 1 on your outline here, it says, unshakable faith is cultivated in community. Cultivated in community. Just look at Paul's instructions here to Titus as the leader of the church that he was heading up in Crete. Some of Paul's instructions include, from verse 2, teach the older men. And then verse 3, teach the older women. And then similarly, in verse 4, urge the younger women. And then in verse 6, encourage the young men. Titus is to teach the older men and the older women so that they may in turn teach and be examples to the younger men and younger women in the church. And so what you see here in just this small text is that you have 3 generations that are represented in this church on Crete. You've got Titus's generation, and then you've got a generation older than him, and then you also have the younger generation than Titus. So 3 generations in this one church. And so you can see the interconnectedness of the 3 generations that Paul is hoping and pleading for them to teach and encourage and urge one another on in the faith. This is a relational aspect to church that if we're not careful in this day and age where everything is so individualistic, that we will completely miss. True? You remember back in the days of pews in the church? Raise your hand if you ever went to a church that had pews. Yeah. Very good. So you remember on those big Sundays when the pews were full and the preacher would get up and he'd encourage everyone to slide on over in the pew to make more room. And everybody would just, oh man, everybody would moan and groan. But if you slid down, the craziest thing happened. There actually was always more room. You remember that? There's no seating capacity when it comes to pews. It feels like a clown car in the circus, you know? There can always be one more clown in there. And so you could pack a ton of people in those pews. And, it might look like a 10-car pileup, but there always was more room. And so, I was looking around. There's no seating capacity in this room, like officially posted anywhere. But typically you'll see one of those. And my thing was, that's just kind of like a general rule, right? Because as long as you have pews, you can always fit more. So it could be anywhere from 150 to 300, 400 plus. You never know. Nowadays, though, we have these individualized chairs, and it's very different, right? You sit in between two chairs, and in an instant. Here's what I'm saying. Let's have a pew mentality in our church, not a chair mentality. Right? We need this idea of togetherness. We can always make more room. And I think I've said this here before I officially came on as Family Life Minister, but Jesus didn't die for you. He died for all of us. He died for the church collectively as one. We together are the single bride of Christ. Don't make Jesus into a polygamist, right? He is only marrying one bride, his church, and that's what we see in the book of Revelation, right? We collectively need to mature in our faith, and if one person is left behind, then all of us suffer because of it. That's what it means to be one. The church is the vehicle to make this unshakable faith into a reality. And sometimes that vehicle can feel more like a Model T than a Tesla, but that's okay. As long as we're doing it together, that is the way forward. One of the best indicators of the importance of the church community is to look at how the Bible depicts it in its finalized form. And so at the end of the book, or actually all throughout the book of Revelation, we see that the first one, Jesus died for people of every tribe and language and people and nation, from Revelation 5:9. Also in Revelation 14:6, the gospel is shared with every nation, tribe, language, and people. And then Revelation 7:9, God's kingdom is made from every nation, tribe, people, and language, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. And so what is John's message here? Well, repetition is our key, right? It's our friend here. When phrases are repeated over and over and over again, repeatedly repeated, that's the author telling us how important that something is. And so God's church is going to be diverse. God's church values people of every tribe and country and nation and people, right? And so we need to be a diverse group because it adds value to our church body. We need diversity of voice to grow in our faith. It breaks my heart when I hear someone being condescending toward another generation, using derogatory terms or making fun of them because they can't read or write cursive or use a rotary phone or some who choose to continue to live with their parents or calling out to people saying, "Hey, boomer," or Karen, right? These are unnecessary things, right? And just know that when you stoop to that level, you are totally losing your rapport with a whole generation of people. Do you realize that? It's just not worth it. Plus, one day we're going to need a younger generation to show us how to use our iPhone 27s, aren't we? So while yes, we're different, but let's use our differences as a strength and not make them a weakness. Warren Wiersbe, in his Titus commentary, Be Faithful, he writes this. He says, one of the strongest forces for spiritual ministry in the local church lies with the older believers. One of the strongest forces for spiritual ministry in the local church lies with the older believers. Did you know that nearly 70% of all Christians come to the faith before the age of 18? 70% before the age of 18. Now that's just a stat. It's not a rule. You don't have to raise your hand. I was 19, right? That's the stat, right? And so what are we going to do with that stat? Why not take advantage of it? Why not focus more time and effort and resources in coming to see young people put their faith in Jesus? If we want to grow the kingdom of God here in Lodi, we need a small army of older believers that are going to invest time and resources and their spiritual depth and maturity into families with kids and teens. That's just the bottom line. If you are an older believer, I want you to strongly consider that statement. Think about who have you been teaching? Who have you been encouraging? Who have you been trying to build up and mentor in the faith? And if you're a younger believer, by the same token, it's hard to be mentored if you don't want to be mentored. And so we have to, as those of us that are younger believers, need to have open and listening ears, willingness to be taught and corrected sometimes, right? That still needs to take place, and that's just part of growing, right? That's a part of love. The love doesn't allow you to sit in this state of suffering and pain, but it wants you to lift you out of that into something better. And so we as a church, a multi-generational church, can be there for one another in love and faith and encouragement. And so let's be a faith community that cultivates an unshakable faith. Number 2, unshakable faith discourages discreditors. Discourages discreditors. I kept on getting those little squiggly lines under discreditors, so it's probably not an actual word according to, Google Docs, but that's okay. We all know what it means, right? So unshakable faith discourages discreditors. And so looking at our passage here, once again, thinking about repetition, Titus was to teach sound doctrine in verse 1. He's to teach sound faith in verse 2. He's supposed to teach in verse 3 what is good. He's supposed to teach in verse 8 what cannot be condemned. Man, don't you just hear that thought of unshakable faith all throughout that? But why are those things to be taught? Well, once again, repetition. First one, in verse 5, so that no one will malign the word of God. And then in verse 8, so that those who oppose you may be ashamed because they have nothing bad to say about us. And then in verse 10, so that in every way they will make the teaching about God, our Savior, attractive. In the same way, 1 Peter 2:12 says this, says, live such good lives among the pagans that though they may accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits us. When we say we believe in God, but then we turn away and act in a way that is contrary to the way that he commands, it just gives people fuel to claim that it's all fake, that it's all made up, that it's just superstition. Back in 1995, for those of us that remember 95, Christian band DC Talk released a song that was titled, What If I Stumble? Anybody familiar with that song, What If I Stumble? Yeah, several of you. It opened up with a quote by a guy named Brennan Manning, and here's what he says in it. The greatest single cause of atheism in the world today is Christians who acknowledge Jesus with their lips, then walk out the door and deny him by their lifestyle. That is what an unbelieving world simply finds unbelievable. Now, I don't know if that is based on any stats or, whatever, but I do know that hypocrisy can ruin your witness. In some survey results that were released by our fellowship, the Churches of Christ, just this week, I saw this posted, I think, Tuesday or Wednesday of this week. on Facebook on why some people leave the church. Here's one person's response to the survey. They wrote, "I realized Jesus would never have preached many of the things I heard from the pulpit. If he walked in today as a brown-skinned traveler, he'd be met with suspicion. Studying church history showed me how power has been used to justify slavery, discrimination, and even violence. The meanest, most spiteful people I've ever known, I met in the church." Wow. From our fellowship. And, that's just one person's experience, and, we can choose to write that off. But should we? That was someone who was sitting here in the chairs, right? People that we could have reached out to, and because of the way that we chose to live our lives, they were turned off from not just Sunday attendance, they were turned off from God. We need to respond to those criticisms and critiques with love and compassion, knowing that God can redeem even the most broken situations and even the most hurt people. Can't he? Of course he can. He's God. The fact that people are looking to us to catch a glimpse of God is both unfortunate and opportunistic at the same time. It's unfortunate because we know that we are still a people that are in process. That God is not finished working through us and making us to look more like Jesus. That process is not complete. And so, of course, yes, we know we're going to mess up and stumble. But at the same time, man, we have to be careful, don't we? Because this is a great opportunity for people to see Jesus in us and through us. It should give us an extra incentive to live lives that are worthy of our calling. As Paul writes in Ephesians 4:1, live lives that are worthy of the calling. When our lives reflect the truth of the gospel, I truly believe that it will inspire the world. I think about the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who boldly make a stand against bowing down in worship to an image of gold. And when they were questioned by the king, King Nebuchadnezzar of the Babylonians, they said this. This was their response to why they could not bow down and worship this idol. King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it. And he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. Wow. That's bold, isn't it? That bold answer got them thrown in the fire. But it also gave God room to be glorified, didn't it? Because it wasn't dependent upon what happened after that. They're saying God's going to be glorified either way. And when God did choose to deliver them, here's how the king responded. He says, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command, and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any God except their own God." Wow. Praise from the king himself. Truth lived out, once again, truth lived out makes faith unshakable, even at the highest level. In the Jesus Freaks Martyrs book, there's a story about a teen girl that's living in a communist country. It doesn't even say which country, but somewhere in Asia. When a Bible study that she's attending is infiltrated and the soldiers decide to play a game. They say anyone who chooses to spit on the Bible can walk out free. The rest, however, will be executed. And after several rounds of spits, a young girl reaches down, picks up the Bible, wiping off the spit from the others, and she tearfully prays, "What have they done to your word? Please forgive them." That prayer cost her her life that day. But what she gained was far more than what she lost, wasn't it? I told you that to tell you this. Following that story in that book, it says this on that page, most of those facing persecution today could have escaped if they had denied their faith. Think about that. Most today that are executed for their faith could have escaped if they had simply said, "I don't believe." I wasn't there when Jesus triumphantly rose from the grave. I didn't get to see him for the 40 days after that he hung around and got to share with his disciples. But one of the most compelling evidences to me that all of this is true is that nearly everyone who was there to see with their own eyes was willing to die to proclaim the truth of what they saw. That says something, doesn't it? And the Bible even tells us about that all the disciples ran away when Jesus was arrested. They were nowhere to be found. But something happened between the cross and the empty tomb that gave them every confidence in the world. You know what it was? Jesus' words all became true in that moment, didn't they? The things that he had been predicting and saying were going to happen all came true. He rose on the third day. Jesus lived out the truth that he shared, inspiring them to live it out as well. Now, I'm not saying that we all need to become martyrs so that others will be inspired to follow us. In fact, I'm not even sure you can plan martyrdom, nor I'm not even saying we should. But you can plan how you will live out your daily life in faithful obedience to God. Maybe you don't have a stage, a podium, or a microphone, but maybe you do have some words of comfort and peace for a struggling mother. Maybe you have difficult people in life that you can love in spite of their actions toward you. Maybe you have patience to give someone a second try, let alone 70 times 7 tries, as Jesus says. Maybe there is a meal that you can share. Or maybe you have an available shoulder to cry on. There are ways that we can put our faith into flesh. We can demonstrate that to other people. Help others see Jesus through your actions. Because truth, once again, lived out, makes faith unshakable. Number 3, unshakable faith transcends the temporary. This is verses 9 and 10, where Paul instructs Titus to teach slaves to be subject to their masters in everything, to try to please them, not talk back to them, and not to steal from them, but to show that they can be fully trusted so that in every way they will make the teaching about God, our Savior, attractive. Not a passage you typically hear on a Sunday morning, is it? But we're not going to skip over it, if that's okay with you. Because I think there's something valuable to share. And that is that stages of life can come and go. Circumstances can come and go. Undeserved and unfortunate sufferings come and go. And sometimes they don't. And that's the unfortunate part of living in this age that we're living in, right? In between the resurrection and the second coming of Jesus. Because we know that God is making all things new. We just don't always see it yet. It's still in the works. And so many people through the years have stumbled over passages like this where you see instructions to slaves. And they have just come to this conclusion that, how can Paul say that slaves should be obedient to their masters, he must be pro-slavery. But that's not Paul's point at all. It's not. He's looking beyond to a time of glory. What he's saying is that looking beyond the tragedies of this life to eternal glory that await us in God's kingdom, that glory is going to far outweigh anything that we have to go through here, no matter what it is. When we get to that glory, everything else will be faded away. He's not being optimistic. Right? It's not just pie in the sky, wishful thinking. He's being truthful and real. Remember what he writes in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, starting verse 16. He says, "Therefore we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day after day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. And so we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. Since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal." The only way that we're going to be able to get through those tough days is if we're able to keep in our minds the promised glory that awaits us. Doesn't that fuel you when you are in the middle of something that just seems so dark? Your faith can power you through that. Your faith is able to look beyond what you're currently entrenched in to say, look, this is not the end. Even if you have to suffer the most despicable and inexcusable tragedy, slavery, an unshakable faith will safely deliver you to glory. Not because you or I deserve it. Way, way on the contrary to that. But because our God made a way for us through Jesus. And so we're going to conclude this morning by saying this: if you are in the thick of it and you are in need of prayers to help you gain an eternal perspective, we would love to get together and pray for you. Or if you have never put your faith in Jesus and you would like to do that today, we would love once again to visit with you and have an opportunity to share with you on what that next step looks like. And so if we can help you in any way, we're going to have Nick come up and lead us in a song. If we can help you during that time, please come forward as we stand and sing.